UCI Gravel World Champs, the big one, straight in there. My first World Champs in the gravel, but my fourth World Champs of this year. So after cyclocross, mountain bike marathon, mountain bike XCO, and now gravel, yeah, it's my fourth World Champs. So crazy race from the start. It was full gas. Thankfully, I was gridded front row, thanks to my UCI points across other disciplines, and then also the results that I got in the Gravel World Series races that I did earlier in the year. So yeah, the start was around a kind of lake loop, a couple kilometer lake loop, and it felt like a combination of a road start, a cross start, and a mountain bike start. My gridding did help massively. I was able to stay out of trouble, because you'll see that in these clips, like behind the first 20 guys was just an absolute fight, and that fight continued. So we headed out onto the main circuit, well, on the main course, and the first 20k was a mixture of road and gravel, but after 12k came the first real gravel section, and the race was so on. Yeah, I can't really put into words how sketchy it felt. You know, we're like sprinting along the main road, full bunch sprint type, just aggression into 90-degree left-hand corner, into 90-degree right-hand corner, into farm track gravel. And when I say farm track gravel, it's grass, loose rough gravel, grass, and more loose rough gravel, and then just ditches at the side. And first of all, like vision, like if you're any further than like 5, 10, 15 wheels back, you couldn't see where you're going, which is fine. But also just like the amount of loose rock that was getting jumped up. So like for the noise of boulders just bouncing up, hitting wheels, pedals, frames, that was ridiculous. And I wish I could have showed you this from within the race. I planned to ride with my camera like I'd done in other UCI World Series races, but the UCI commissaire decided on the start line that I wasn't going to have mine, which is a shame, because the first 30 minutes would have just been something to show you. But yeah, is what it is, so I'll just have to describe it to you. So yeah, after those first gravel sections, I realised quite quickly that I wasn't going to risk being further back at any time than like 20th wheel. So as we approached the first feed, I was in good position. It was going quick through the feed, so when I went over to get my bottle, I just didn't quite get it right, and unfortunately it slipped out of my hand, so I missed one feed there, which is a bit annoying. But directly after, the race basically opened up as we went up the first climb. I was kind of second, third wheel, with guys like Lucas Baum and Paul Voss. We were both wanting to stay out of trouble, and then over the top, Maharaj already started to push, and you know, this is 45 minutes into the race, and guys like this were already at the front trying to put some damage in. So over the top of the first climb, there's kind of like a ridgeline section with a few kickers. These were generally okay, you know, just trying to hold position. Whenever we got to road section, it would normally bunch right up, and you'd be in danger of kind of getting shuffled back. But I knew where I needed to be in front, so I would kind of be patient and then surge forward where I needed to be. Then into the first kind of main gravel descent down towards Pieve di Saligo. It was actually Connor Swift who was leading, but he hadn't ridden the section, so I shouted to him to kind of let me through, which he did, and then he cleverly just let the wheel go. You know, I rode the descent at my pace, he let the wheel go, and a kind of 10-15 second gap opened. Obviously it's nothing like race changing after only 1 hour, but it's those type of things that they add up. So it allowed me to get a gel down me, get a little bit of recovery before we entered into feed 2, which was hectic again. And around the town of Pieve di Saligo, the bunch really swelled as a lot of guys tried to come back. And I think it was probably 80-100 riders going into the next phase of the race. So after 50 kilometers, we're going along kind of a rolling main road, and that road turns left, and then you start to climb up towards this kind of one of the main gravel climbs on loop 1. And it was the same deal, you know, the kind of fight for position. The strongest guys, mainly the World Tour guys, they were just lined out on the front. These guys, they're so strong, they can afford to take the wind, they can afford to just use their strength to keep them in position, whereas I was really trying to conserve at these moments. So I would kind of sit in the wings, I'd try and be on the outsides a little bit. So we turn into the gravel, and the climb goes up in stages. So a really surgy climb, you're surging up to kind of 550 watts and then back down to 250, 300, and then surging again. So I was riding this climb in maybe 10th, 15th position. Over the top of this, there was a short, fast tarmac descent into a tarmac kicker. On the kicker, I moved up, and then down the next descent, which took you down towards the lake, I was in, I think, for 5th or 6th position. Actually, maybe more like 10th or 11th. And as we turned into the next gravel section, I was following Wout van Aert. He made a slip on the gravel basically, and didn't get his foot out in time and just had a little crash. That let the wheel go in front of him, obviously, so I chased back on. Wout and Paul Voss chased back on instantly again. But all these little efforts, they do take their toll. So then we're on kind of a bike path, quite technical actually, like you're going from bike path to small road to gravel to streets to cobbles, and that takes us towards the lake. But before the lake, we do this kind of walker's path in the shade above the vineyards, and I knew this as the kind of next key section, and I had got shuffled back a little bit. I was probably 15th, 20th wheel, which wasn't ideal for this. You want to be top 5 definitely, and it had been an hour and a half of full gas racing so far, and that the guys are going to start making mistakes and start just letting those wheel go. So I managed to kind of slowly work my way up, and just before it opened out onto the flatlands, you come down this steep chute into 2 hairpin corners, and then so I was able to kind of slingshot up the inside, overtake another rider, and then I kind of slid into Keegan Swenson's wheel. The speed instantly got very high because I think Mohoric, Swift, Valverde, Wout, and maybe one other knew that this would be pretty key. The speeds were about to go very high, and we were about to go into a fast section. And as this was happening, we were railing it around a left-hand corner at like 40 k's an hour. Keegan's wheels slip from underneath him on the kind of wet grass, and he goes like flying into the wine groves, and that leaves a gap in front of me to get to Valverde's wheel. So I instantly start drilling it because I know the speeds have just gone so high. Like this is the time. This is like one of the key moments. So I started drilling it. Paul Voss comes through and helps me across. So at that point, it's 7 of us in the front. It must have been Wout, Mohoric, Swift, Paul Voss, me, Valverde, and probably one other that I feel bad for forgetting. It was just 6 of us. So at that point, we went through feed zone 4, I think. I managed to get a bottle. So that's the first bottle I got in the whole race after 75k. And then we started drilling it around the lake. So I think it was Mohoric and Wout on the front, just drilling, like out of every corner, full sprint. And even Valverde couldn't hold the wheel. Like we were going that fast technically around the corner. So I went in front of Valverde. We kept going, and our group established for whatever it was, 5 minutes. I come around the corner, Wout's at the side of the track with a puncture. He'd hit like a manhole cover, the edge of a manhole cover that was like in the grass. So he instantly punctured. So after crashing, coming back, and then puncturing, you'll see what he does later in the race. So then that was 5 in the front, and we're just approaching the next real steep climb. So it's, a kilometer, over 10% average, must have been max 20-30%. And at this point, we're going into quite a technical part of the track with steep kickers, steep descents, and lots of gravel. And I had in my head, okay, right, I've been with the top boys in the flat section. Now is the time to start conserving a little bit in this mid phase of the race. It happened that this was also the time that the big boys started to push on, and I think that just shows the difference in level at the moment. Is that like when I needed to recover, they were just getting going, and that's kind of what I'm aspiring for in the next few years, is to get to that point. But I started to kind of come off the gas a little bit, and a couple riders started to catch me, which I was able to work with. So as we entered the Poggio climb, the road Poggio climb, I must have been still top 10, but guys like Kevin Panhausen caught me, Lawrence Nassen, for Gianni Vermeersch. Who else would have been there? Maharch, his Slovenian teammate, and I think that was it. So we had a group of 4 or 5 going over the top of the Poggio. Then there's another steep descent that Lawrence Nassen crashed on, Gianni Vermeersch punctured on, and then another steep climb, which I was riding pretty strong on. But I knew at this point, we were literally probably only just over halfway during the race. So then the fast roads back down to Pieve di Soligo, and then you head out onto this kind of flatter loop. So it's 40k of flat before you reach the final 25k of real hard riding. Now our group swelled a little bit, so we must have had 8 in our group, and it was working relatively well. There were some guys not really pulling, but I started to become one of those guys. I think I was riding so above my limit that I was stressing about not bonking, so I was trying to get so much fuel down me and caffeine, and it was hot and the racing had been full gas, and I think the combination of that just made my stomach really not happy. So I went to the back of the group and kind of vomited up half my stomach, which was not pleasant, kind of humbled me a lot. So I lost the wheels go, which was pretty frustrating, because at that point we were riding for top 10. I think, of course, in the final anything could have happened again, but I just wasn't good enough to hold that group. So I got caught by the next chase group on the road, which was group 3. Held with them for a little bit, and then just before the last kind of section, I couldn't stay with them as well. The pace was just too high. Gianni Vermeersch had come back from his puncture and was drilling it. Wout then passed me, so he'd had like 8 minutes of stop time or something trying to fix his puncture, and he came back past me like a train and would end up finishing top 10, which is just mad. So as we head into the final kind of phase, there was one feed zone that I really needed again. Me and Dave were doing like double feed zone hand ups, so like he'd hold up both bottles, I'd go no hands and just like double grab them, which I've done at races before, but I didn't know if it would really work for this gravel racing, because it's so like you're going through feed zones at 4k an hour. But in the slower ones we could do that. But there was one feed zone that I was just at the back of the group, and the Estonian rider grabbed my water, and I was so pissed. I was like, hey! But he ended up giving it to me, of course, and I gave him a bit of like a spray of water as well, because when you are in these groups, like, you are in it together, you are trying to just get through together, so stuff like that happens. We got to the last feed zone. I'm on my own and just trying to survive, and but the last phase of the track does really suit me, and that's also another thing that, like, if I'd made it to that phase of the course with a bit more gas in my legs, like, it would have been cool to see what I could have done, but that's just how it goes. I didn't have any gas, I was just on full survival. So up the last climb I was just kind of hanging on for dear life. But there were a lot of other people on their limit. Like, I chatted to Connor Swift after, who got third, and he said from like an hour, 2 hours to go, he was just full suffering, like just trying to get to the finish, and that's the guy who got third. So it was one of those type of races, like just super high work rate, and there was no like armchair ride around it, because the terrain, the style of racing, the tactics just lent itself to being, you had to be just so on the front foot. You had to race from the front, you had to be proactive, you had to be first and second into sections, and I think that racing does suit me, but I just, at the moment, I don't have that depth to go for 5 hours. So I crossed the line in 24th, having slipped back quite a bit, but just really proud of how I rode those first few hours, like strong, confident, and there's a lot to improve obviously for future years, but it gives me some good confidence knowing that I can be there in the front when it really matters. I just need more gas when it does matter. It was a mad race, and the power file does reflect that. So the first 55 minutes, they were done at 36k an hour with 290 watts average, 315 normalized, and I think that maybe doesn't say enough about how punchy it was, but obviously when you're punching really hard and then you're freewheeling for a while, the numbers aren't going to be great. But then, so that was the numbers for the first hour, but for the first 2 hours and 10 minutes, it was still 35 kilometers an hour average, 280 watts average, and 310 watts normalized power. So those are kind of, those are comparable to like kind of marathon worlds numbers, but just the speed, you know, the 35k an hour on the terrain we were going with the climbs that we were bombing descents at 70, 80k an hour, to kind of get that. My best 10 minutes was after an hour and a half, which was 350 watts average, and yeah, my overall time was 5 hours 10 minutes, 250 watts average, 280 normalized power, 32.5 kilometers an hour average, 160 beats per minute heart rate average, and 194 max. On the average speed, I was chatting to Maharaj before the race on the start line, and he was like, "Oh, it's going to be a long day," and I said, "Oh yeah, well, probably actually under 5 hours," and he was like, "Boah, no way, that's not possible." We did in the recon, we did 27 average, and no, there's no way it goes from 24 to 27 to 34. It's not possible. And his average speed for winning was 35k an hour. So I think, yeah, even these World Tour guys underestimated just how high the level would be and how fast you could ride around that course. And I think it says something for gravel that, like, yeah, at the highest level the speeds are still really high. So the aero, the gearing, the tires, the rolling resistance, there's so much to be done in all of that. And I think one thing that's not been tapped into yet is the kind of team tactics in gravel. Like, it is so selective that it is almost every man for himself. But I think, like, as GB and Connor getting third, like, I'd like to think I helped him just a little bit, you know, that little bit of presence in the front group, because when you look around and it's 4 or 5 Belgians, 2 Dutch riders, like, having 2 British riders makes a difference, and just that little bit more presence to kind of hold their own. And obviously when it gets to the meat of it, like, Connor is just, he's 100% for himself and just getting on with it. But I think in the future there's things we can do with team tactics to try and get a better ride, because we've got a lot of strong riders. It's just, yeah, with the gridding, with the bunch positioning, with the mechanical support, with the feeding, there's a lot to be done in top gravel racing. So you'll have seen the results sheet, like the top 10 was pretty dominated by World Tour riders, but they're all those type of World Tour riders who are just class on a bike. They have something about them that just lends itself to this type of racing. You have to be so versatile with your power profile, with how you handle the bike, with how you have to be really individual as well. You have to be able to look after yourself and your bike for those 5 hours. So it's a very worthy podium, and Maharaj is a really worthy champion. So no, it was really good to see. And like the event as a whole, like, I was so impressed with the course. I think whoever designed that course really, like, the knowledge needed to have created a course that takes in all that terrain is pretty impressive. The fans were insane, you know, thousands of fans on every climb, just going crazy, and that was really, really cool. I think the organisation, it's got to improve a lot, and the lack of coverage in the UCI Women's was pretty shameful. Yeah, there's no excuses for it, and it will get better, but there's no excuses for that this year. And also the coverage for the elite men's, it can always get better too. But first we need equality for the men and women. And yeah, I think, yeah, it was just a mad race, mad experience. A massive shout out to Dave, my Swanee, and he was being everything at the weekend, you know, chef, driver, Swanee, feed zones, everything. So he was doing all the feed zone hopping and looking after me, so massive shout out to him. Massive shout out to Trinity Racing and Specialized for all the equipment and support. I can hands down say that I ran the perfect bike setup. I don't think I would have done it any differently. I didn't have a single problem, a single drop chain, a single puncture, any problem with my bike. It was absolutely spot on. And in these races it makes so much of a difference. The attrition on the bike is just as big as it is on the body. So No, I was super impressed. I probably shouldn't be surprised because it's been like that all year with my equipment. It has just been spot on. But yeah, a big credit to